Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Things College and Career. Today, we have a great guest, Amanda Pellowe Reynolds. She is a biomedical engineer, and she tells us all about her undergrad years as a biochemistry major at Gettysburg College, her fellowship in Norway, and her time at Yale, where she earned her PhD in biomedical engineering. And then we talk about her current career at Bain & Company Consulting in Boston.
Yeah, she definitely has so many great tips and advice for any young person that's interested in going into the science field. So if you know anybody that is interested in science as a career, she shares so many different possibilities and great tips and advice. So definitely this podcast is for you if you have a possible future interest in science.
Okay, enough of her introduction. Let's get on to the podcast.
Let's do it. Hello, Amanda Pellowe Reynolds. Welcome to All Things College and Career. Thank you so much for doing our podcast today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. Absolutely. So, Amanda, where are we talking to you from today?
I am in Jamaica Plain, which is just outside of Boston.
Yes, we know
moved
it.
Here just a couple months ago.
Oh, that's great. How do you like Jamaica Plains?
I love it. It's great. It's tough, a little tough with everything being closed, but I'm excited to explore a little more once things start to reopen. But there's a lot of green space. A lot.
Yeah, it seems to be a really growing area.
A lot of restaurants and we're hearing about, because Jeff was there for a while. So
my son-in-law. Yeah.
And our aunt, of course, but that was a long time ago.
So. And Brianna's friend Molly lived there for a number of years. But anyway, we digress.
Anyway, we're getting off the topic. Right. So, Amanda, welcome, and thanks for being here. We usually start our podcast. Well, not usually. We always start our podcast by asking our guests 3 things they love about their job. So could you tell us what your job is and 3 things that you love about it?
Yeah. So I'm a consultant at Bain & Company, and maybe I can just describe that a little bit. I know when I was...
That would be great.
In college and even part of grad school, I did not even know what that was. So
right. And that's great that you're keeping the listeners in mind, and perfect.
Yeah, of course. So basically, as a consultant, I work for different companies on projects to kind of help them with whatever business problem they need. So there's really a wide variety of the types of work and the types of industries, but it's often like 3 to 6 month projects that you work on a team of like 5 to 6 people, and just kind of go in and collaborate with the company. And this actually transitions nicely into one of the things I like the best about the job, which is the variety and kind of the ability to learn all these new things. I feel like you never really get bored. And even if you kind of start to get bored of something, you're pretty much done with it and ready. The new thing is going to pop up soon. So you can't really exist in that space too long.
That does make it both challenging but interesting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then, the second thing I think is probably pretty cliche. I'm sure a lot of people say this, but I really love the people I work with and just the work environment. And I found it to be really supportive, like a really supportive environment, and people are really just there to help you learn and grow. And it's just fun. Everybody is kind of hardworking and kind and funny and has interesting backgrounds. And so that has made the job extremely enjoyable.
That sounds perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know if it is a cliche. People do say that, but not everyone likes the people they work with.
Right. This is true.
So it's nice when that happens, for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess the third would probably be there are some kind of fun perks that come with the job. There's some travel, which is case related. That can be fun. I think that depends a little more on your personality. It can be weekly, which I think gets old for some people.
Right.
But there's also more fun travel that's less frequent. So we do these international global trainings, actually. So I went to Lisbon for a training event last year, and I got to go to San Diego for a different training event. I was supposed to go to LA, but it's been delayed.
Not surprised. That is nice when you don't have to do it as a routine part of your job, but just occasionally. That sounds perfect.
It does. Nice balance right there.
Yeah.
So, Amanda, you were a biochemistry and molecular biology major at Gettysburg College, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So what made you decide to major in, what's a shorter way of saying that major?
You can just say biochemistry.
Okay, biochemistry. Yes, thank you. What inspired you to select that as a major? And I'm just trying to turn the clock back a bit and take a look at where your head space was at in high school and what led you down that path.
Yeah. So in high school, I always loved science. I took as many elective science courses as I could, basically my senior year, beyond the required, physics and anatomy and things like that. But chemistry was my favorite course. But I knew I wanted to major in science, and I went back and forth a bunch between whether I wanted to be more biology focused or more chemistry focused, and trying to think about what different jobs you could do with those majors. And I think I preferred chemistry, but I didn't know kind of career-wise what that opened up for me. And so it was a little bit of a this major hits all of those buckets. And so I have to choose if I do biochemistry.
Definitely keeps your options open. And were you possibly considering a medical school path or something like that earlier on? Or
at that time, I wasn't. I did consider it later on. I think this kind of goes to the point that I made when we first hopped on the call, which is I just didn't have a good sense of what a career after college in science looked like. I didn't really know any scientists. Obviously, I had been to doctors, but I didn't really know anyone who had gone down that path. And so I was one of the first people in my family to go to college. My mom had, but she was not a scientist, and none of my cousins or siblings had yet. And so I think I just sort of thought 4 years has got to be plenty. What more could I need?
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It's funny that, I want to bring up not to self-promote, but you said something to us before we started recording, Amanda, that made us feel good. And the whole reason we're doing this podcast is that, like you were just saying, you didn't have someone that you could find out about the different science careers, and that you were saying that you wish a podcast like ours was around them, because then you could have possibly listened to some of them.
Exactly.
But so, I guess if you don't listen to it on a podcast, or we haven't covered it, or you can't find information and you don't have someone in your life, it gets tricky to try to get some real information, really.
Right. Yeah. And we definitely want to dive into that. What are the opportunities coming out of college with a biochemistry degree? And I think a lot of people do think about health professions because, as you said, they've been to the doctor and that's something that they see. But there's a lot of other great opportunities out there that they may not be aware of, I think. So that's
right.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get into that. But to start, Amanda, so like Meg was saying, you chose to go to Gettysburg College. Why did you choose Gettysburg?
That's a good question. I was, again, kind of on the fence between a couple of schools. I knew I wanted a small liberal arts school. I knew I wanted to try living somewhere new. I grew up in New Hampshire, and so I wanted to try something out of state. I wanted to be able to run track, which is why Division III was good for me. I wasn't hyper competitive, but still was really passionate about running. And then once I kind of narrowed it down to the schools I applied to and visited a couple, I really liked that Gettysburg had a really strong science department. So I went and visited, and I sat in on a class, and you could just tell it was small class sizes. You could tell that the teachers really cared about the students. Everybody was engaged. And then I went to visit with a professor afterwards, and actually a student stopped by to ask questions. And we ended up all going into this seminar room where the professor was whiteboarding material and helping the student. And it just felt really like an environment I thought I could thrive in. And then on top of that, there was the financial component. They actually didn't give me the best financial aid. They were maybe the second best. And I just wrote to them and said, I'd really like to go here, but I actually have a better offer somewhere else. Can you match it? And they said yes. So
Wow. Good job on your part to do that.
Great tip out there, too.
Exactly. I know I really try to spread the word on that because I think people don't realize. But I mean, the worst they can say is no.
Exactly. Right. It's not like they're going to rescind their offer. So why not ask? Yeah.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you mentioned track because Amanda lives not far from where we do, or you did at one time. And we showed up at a road race on Thanksgiving just a family 5K, and Amanda won the race. There was like 600 people in it.
Yes, yes, she did. Meg reminded me that. She goes, remember? But yeah, and I said, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I was like, $5.99.
No, you weren't. No, not at all.
Yeah. It's an out and back, so you can see the first place woman just flying back. Yeah. You're in your first mile somewhere.
So you were definitely a little competitive, if not, so don't undersell yourself too much. But anyway, so can you tell us just a bit about what you got involved in at Gettysburg? For example, I know when you graduated, you earned a Fulbright to go to Bergen area in Norway. So just wondering, how that came about and what was that experience like?
Yeah. So in terms of extracurriculars, I was really mostly just doing track and cross country, and indoor tracks was 3 seasons. And then I also had a work study job. So I honestly didn't do a lot outside of those things.
Oh, wow. That, especially being a biochemistry major, I think that.
Which is considered one of the hardest majors to take.
I think it has a pretty high attrition rate, but
so that took up most of my time. Although once I started to get a little bit further into the college experience, maybe my sophomore year, I started hearing people talking about things like medical school and graduate school. And so to your point earlier, I hadn't initially considered those, but I started to think about are those things I'd be interested in? Do these sound like jobs I'd like? And I ultimately decided I didn't think medical school was for me. And so in my mind, there were kind of 2 options, which were medical school or graduate school. And I guess some of the reasons I ruled out medical school is I just wasn't sure if I'm pretty introverted. I wasn't sure how much I would like that kind of daily interaction with patients and like delivering hard news and and then I also just wasn't 100% sure, and I felt like it was a huge financial undertaking if you're not 100% sure.
Absolutely.
And time and money. Yep.
Exactly. So
but
I thought,
let me interrupt you real quick, Amanda, because
sure.
you said something I think is kind of important. You said you felt like you were either going to go to a medical school or a graduate school program. So do you feel like if this is your major, biochemistry, that, you're not 4 years and done and can come out and get a job? Or do you think
No, there are definitely people that got a job.
Okay. What type of jobs would you?
Yeah, they'd often go to labs and work as, a bench scientist or doing some sort of quality control work at a bigger lab. There's also, there's definitely people who kind of transition into other fields too. That's the thing, which we'll get into, I'm sure, what I do now, I use almost none of my scientific background, but the skills that you learn are transferable. You're learning how to analyze data and think about a bunch of pieces of a puzzle and, drive to answers and do research. And frankly, you're learning how to learn.
Yeah. Learning how to think. No, absolutely.
Right. And I'm sure just the liberal arts background serves you well in other areas, just drawing upon a deeper knowledge base. But go ahead, Bobby. I'm sorry, though.
No, I'm the one that interrupted Amanda. So anyway, you were, we're all interrupting each other.
Apologies all around.
Right, exactly. But Amanda, you were talking about your opportunities and how you didn't think medical school was right for you, but you were thinking about a graduate school program. So that's where I interrupted you.
Yeah, and to build off your question too, I wasn't sure that I was going to do either of these. It was more like I learned more about them and started to question whether they might be right for me.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I really like learning. I enjoy that part of college. I had also been a teaching assistant actually for organic chemistry. So that was one of my work study jobs. And so I really liked teaching. And I thought, well, maybe kind of the research academic route would be the way for me to go. And so then I started trying to get some more research opportunities. So I did research on campus the summer between my junior and senior year and kind of test that out and see if that was something that I liked. And I did. I enjoyed it. And so I kept that up through my senior year.
That's such another great tip to try things out, test it out before you, invest all kinds of time and money. But anyway, go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, no, that's sort of been the whole story of my trajectory. I don't really know. And so let's try these different things. And so you also mentioned the Fulbright, and that was definitely
kudos, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kudos.
That's an amazing accomplishment right there.
It really is. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So when I applied to that, there's obviously one motivation, which is just that it sounds like a really cool, amazing experience to be able to travel to another country and, learn about another culture. But I also was just, even after one summer of research and then some research throughout the school year, I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to commit to a 5 to 6 year PhD.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe I'll try to do something for a year. And so I had applied to the Fulbright, and I was also applying to research jobs at that time to kind of try out research in, quote unquote, the real world, to see how I liked it before applying to graduate school.
Right. And it's probably always good to have a backup plan when your plan A is a Fulbright.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right. Plan A, I'm going to learn to fly.
Yeah.
If I can't fly, I'm going to, have a plan B, right?
Yeah.
So, I know that, yeah. So good for you. And you got your plan A. So tell us about
A.
your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was pretty excited about that and shocked, to be honest. So, when I did my Fulbright in Norway, as Meg said, and, every country has different types of Fulbrights. So some of them just have teaching language ones where you go in and you teach English in different countries. And then some countries have these kind of additional types of Fulbrights that can be either pretty specific, so they may have an arts or a music one, or they might be pretty broad where you kind of propose your own research topic and can go. And so Norway was one country that allowed that more broad type of application and also allows you to speak English, which was one of the criteria that I considered.
Right.
So you proposed your own research in the application?
Exactly. But
cool.
I definitely had some help. So you have to be affiliated with a university. So I actually just Googled online different universities in Norway and actually in a bunch of Scandinavian countries, and just kind of cold emailed them to say I would like to apply for this. And if I get it, I can basically work for free, right? Because they fund it. So, would you be willing to host me and help me come up with a project? And I got one response, which is, you only need one. So
right.
That's right.
Right.
That's kind of the process there. And so then I worked with that professor to create a research proposal.
Excellent. So that experience in itself was valuable, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. It was a pretty new experience to me. And I was, learning about all these new techniques that I was proposing kind of in real time as I was proposing them. But I was really lucky to have such a supportive person be helping me out with that and kind of willing to help.
Oh, that sounds like a great experience. Do you want to talk about that research at all?
Yeah. So when I was there, I was working in a biomaterials lab. So as a part of this kind of trajectory, I realized I think I liked science that was a bit more applied versus just maybe more theoretical or more like basic foundational science. So the labs that I reached out to were primarily attached to hospitals and had kind of an application component to them. So this was in a biomaterials lab, and we were researching immune reactions to the debris from different metal implants, so like hip implants and knee implants. I actually collaborated with a bunch of people in the hospital as well to collect blood samples from patients, and then we exposed them to some different materials that another graduate student in the lab had actually developed and measured the immune reactions to them.
So did you learn anything one thing
I have learned about research is it's pretty slow.
It's
hard to get a lot of data, a lot of patient samples, and really robust conclusions in 11 months.
So it's still a work in progress, basically.
Yeah. We did publish it. We actually published it as kind of a kind of case study. So that, this is what we've seen. And we definitely did see certain inflammatory pathways seem to be more elevated, but it was kind of like preliminary study where more work would need to be done to really confirm that.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. You got the ball rolling. So somebody needs to pick it up from there to make any further conclusions.
And the lab there is still actively pursuing this type of work.
Oh, good.
So,
yeah. It seems important to know what kind of hip implant to get.
Right. Right. And how the materials are going to affect you for sure. So if you had one tip you could give someone applying for a Fulbright, what would it be?
I think just don't be shy about reaching out to these people. I think it's kind of the same thing. It's funny. I am actually quite a shy person, but I think a lot of these opportunities that I've gotten are just from asking, again, there's really the worst somebody can say is no or not email you back. And so,
right.
Just,
exactly.
Go for it. And then just be thoughtful about how you're writing the application and thoughtful about which country you're pursuing. They want to see that there's a reason. And so you can't really select a country just at random. So I had studied abroad in Denmark, and so I had some connection, but they want to see a compelling kind of story about why you want to study there.
Makes total sense. Yeah.
Absolutely.
My dad always used to have a saying that he would say to all of us growing up, that you can't strike out unless you're in the batter's box. So basically, you can swing and miss, but you don't even have the chance of striking out if you don't take a shot at it. So
that's right.
But anyway, so at what point did you decide to apply to Yale and go for your PhD? And did you go for it in biomedical engineering? Am I correct about that? Or?
Yep, biomedical engineering. And so that was part of this kind of transition to more applied sciences. And this was, again, one of those things where I didn't have an engineering background. And so I had to look for programs that, when I applied to PhD programs, I applied to like half engineering programs that had more relaxed requirements that didn't require you to have an engineering background. And then I also applied to programs.
As a biochemistry major, you had plenty of math, right?
Yeah, I did. I had enough math and I had, all the science requirements. And so some programs, that's fine. There were some programs that just had more specific requirements that I didn't meet.
Right.
So I just sort of did half engineering programs that I met and then half non-engineering programs just in case. But in terms of, even just deciding to get the PhD, I think it was just, I really enjoyed that time doing research in Norway. And I thought, okay, I think I could see myself doing this. And I think the ultimate goal at that time was, I really thought I wanted to be a professor. So that's what led me to the PhD. And then a part of how I chose Yale was just based on that kind of the way that they approach their program. They have a really interdisciplinary engineering program that they collaborate pretty strongly with the medical school. And I ended up doing a lot of work with the medical school research centers while I was there. They just had a wide variety of students. So like in my cohort, we had people with engineering, electrical engineering backgrounds that were going into researching medical imaging. We had people with biomedical engineering backgrounds. We had people with biology backgrounds. So they really do let in kind of a wide array of
it makes such sense, though, that it is more interdisciplinary.
Yeah, can you all learn from each other?
Yeah. Exactly. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and when I was looking at programs, just to if somebody is kind of looking and wondering where to start, I found especially in the sciences, it was hard to kind of pick a topic like microbiology or I don't know, a very specific topic. And then it wasn't necessarily apples to apples across the universities. It's more about the individual research that the professors are doing within those departments. And so that was also part of why I ended up gravitating to biomedical engineering. I don't think that was even really my original plan, but as I was researching these schools' websites, I kind of kept landing there and thinking this is the research I'm interested in. So
do you think you made the right choice? Are you happy with them?
Yeah, I do.
That's interesting because you didn't let the name of the degree drive your choice. You let the research drive your choice. I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what research were they doing at Yale that sucks you in?
So it was a lot of biomaterials work, which I had really enjoyed while I was in Norway.
That's
so
kind
the
of
lab
what
I ended up, exactly. The lab I ended up joining, actually rotated in two labs, and they had two different labs that did biomaterials related work, which is again another reason why I chose them, because graduate school, a PhD program is a little bit interesting because it's not just about can you get in and are you interested in the work. It's also about whether or not the professor has funding for you and is accepting students. And so I wanted to choose a university where I'd have multiple labs of interest in case one of them didn't work out. Oh, that's so smart.
In case the funding dried up on one, you could pivot to the next. Oh, that's really another great tip.
Yeah, they also guaranteed funding for, I think, 5 years, and I think it's now 6 years, which not every school does. So I know people who have been in situations where if their professor leaves or runs out of funding, they kind of have to leave also and find a new
that's a really terrible position.
Route.
You put all that time into your PhD and then you're left high and dry.
Exactly.
That's a really good thing to think about and research that there's going to be enough funding. And of course, a university like Yale that's so well endowed can probably make that 6-year guarantee.
Exactly.
But not all universities can do that probably.
Yeah, no, they don't all.
Did you get any assurance at your PhD program would complete within a certain number of years, because we've also talked to a couple of people that they just dragged on and on and on, and the funding ran out and there just seemed to be no end in sight.
Yeah, you should definitely talk to the professors and the students. You should talk to students that are currently there about what the typical length is. It varies by program and by school. Biology tends to be a little slower than chemistry because you're dealing with cells and animals that can, die, or there's a lot more biological variability.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and it probably varies by professor that you're working with as well, I would imagine.
It does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, there are some professors that tend to produce graduate students that end up going on to professorships, so postdocs. And then there are others where they have more of their graduate students going into like industry jobs or consulting jobs. And so that's another thing to consider, is not just the length of time, but also what kinds of students tend to join that lab. And sometimes that's because that's just the mentorship style of the advisor tends to lend itself one way or the other. And that's not to say that, it's never 100%, right? It's not to say that if you joined one lab, you couldn't go a certain way by any means.
Right. But it's just something to consider, something to look into. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing you hear about at least is that if you're teaching as a PhD candidate, you're teaching some undergraduate classes or doing labs, it's professors tend to be reluctant to give up their help, so that's the other thing to be aware of and ask about before you enter a program.
Yeah,
so.
I thankfully didn't encounter that, and most of the professors at Yale that I was aware of were pretty supportive and really great about trying to get you out. And I think typical was for our department was 5.5 years.
So that's really good. Yeah.
That's reasonable for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard of people like 10
9.
years and there's
9.
I know a few of them. That's by choice from the student as well. It's a really interesting time of life. It's a really flexible program. It can be. I think that's also kind of advisor dependent, and research dependent, but you kind of make your own schedule. You have your own goals. You're researching exactly what you want to research. And so
it's tough to give up.
To stay. Yeah.
Well, right. And there is that side too. So, right. There's two sides to that story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you could share with listeners, what are some potential career opportunities you could come out and do with a biochem degree?
Yeah, there are so many. So just kind of to speak to my own journey, I thought I wanted to be a professor. And after a couple of years, I decided that was actually not what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. The job was just very different from what I imagined it to be. I think it's a lot more grant writing and anything else. And anyway, I still think it's a really great job. And I have a lot of friends that are going that way. And I think I could have been happy doing that, but ultimately, decided something else. And so when I was making this decision, I thought about all of these different options. And so a lot of people end up going into industry jobs where they might be doing really any array of things. They could be doing like regulatory jobs. There are people in kind of policy work, going to work for the federal government, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, kind of allocating funding and thinking through science policies for science education. There's, you can go on to be a scientist just as you would kind of the professorship track, but at an industry firm. And different industries have kind of different approaches to how they do this.
It sounds like you have some great opportunities out there. So I think those are things that young people aren't really thinking about either, because as you said, they just don't see it in their life that much, those sorts of jobs.
Exactly. And I think we tend to hear a lot about the most common, very clear-cut jobs where it's like you do ABC and then you become a lawyer or a doctor or a professor. But there's so many jobs out there you've never even heard of, and they may not have a clear-cut path, but when you have the background and the skills, like we were talking about with the liberal arts education, I think a PhD can be quite similar. You really have a lot of great skills that you develop throughout that program that can take you in a number of different directions.
That can fit into a lot of areas, yeah.
Exactly.
And something we hear over and over, and something for listeners to consider is, the jobs we're doing today, half of them didn't exist 20 years ago.
Right.
So much
especially in science and tech.
Right. Mm-hmm. So much of making yourself marketable is just like getting a foundation that you can quickly learn and adapt and change. But anyway, I digress. So go ahead, Bobby. You were going to ask about.
Yeah. So we know, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you work at Bain, spelled BAIN. I know from the research I've done, I mean, they're into just about everything. Can you tell us, and this is Bain's you are in the greater Boston area. That's where Bain is that you're working at. I'm sure they're all over the place, but can you tell us about your job there a little bit? And I know you touched on it at the beginning, but what a typical day is like for you and some of the advantages and drawbacks of your position?
Yeah. And just to clarify, there's a lot of people confuse Bain Consulting with Bain Capital.
Yeah.
And so I work at Bain and Company Consulting.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's good you made that distinction because I wasn't sure, to be honest. So that's interesting.
Yeah, no, a lot of people assume Bain Capital, actually. So I like to clarify. And so let's see, a typical day. So I described the job a little bit at the beginning. Basically, we consult different businesses and kind of help them with different business problems. And so I can give you an example of the types of cases I've worked on if that's helpful.
That would be great. Yeah.
So the first case that I was on, we were helping a retail company improve their customer experience. Basically, they seen that they were maybe not performing so well. And so we launched this massive survey to basically, people like you and I, consumers, to ask them what kind of things did you do when you shop, and then just kind of ask them about, we call it like a sentiment analysis, of like what kind of things made you more likely to enjoy your experience, what kind of things made you less likely to enjoy your experience, and then basically got this huge data set back and had to analyze it and cut all of the data. So it's quite similar to the work I was doing in my PhD.
Yeah.
Just a totally different topic and totally different, types of findings. At the end, we basically put together an answer for them. These are the areas where you really need to focus and improve, because these are kind of the biggest pain points for your customers. And also they're the most likely to, if you improve them, they're the most likely to improve your customer experience as well.
Yeah.
And so they actually then did another project with us where they continue to work on implementing those different operational changes.
Wow, that sounds pretty fun. And totally unrelated to biomedical engineering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so
that's your point earlier.
Exactly. It's totally unrelated, but I was actually really surprised when I started how many of the skills are quite similar. It's a lot of data analysis and making sure you're asking the right questions to get the answers that you need and to get at the important insights. And then at the end, kind of packaging up your findings into a story that other people can understand, which is a lot of the writing and presenting component of science research. I have also done some more scientific projects. So I've done a variety. So I also did one for a biotech company where we helped them think about and develop their kind of 5-year and 10-year strategy for what kind of drugs they should be pursuing and what kinds of technologies they should be pursuing and how to think about that. So we helped them come up with a framework so that even after our project ended, they could continue to do this type of work.
That sounds pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
Do you work with a pretty large team, or is it a small team? Or
it's typically a team of about 5 or 6 people.
Wow. So that does seem like a pretty big project for that many people, but you must really have a big...
Well, it's over a couple of months, you have a decent amount of time. And then that's just the kind of immediate team. So I'm a consultant, and we'll typically have like a couple of consultants, a couple of analysts, and a manager. And then there's also leadership that they handle a lot more of the client relations, so the partners and things like that. And then we also work with the clients. So, you can't really just step outside, come up with a plan and hand it to them and say like, hope you like it. So we work really closely with them as well. And so they...
to get their feedback during the process and all that. Yeah.
Make sure they're getting what they paid for.
Right. So you did mention at the beginning, when I asked you 3 things you love about your job, was the variety. That was like your number one thing. So this is what you're saying. This is the example of it.
Exactly.
Your projects aren't even all right. You would think, they're all going to be biomedical or biochemistry, but you have a great variety, and you're probably learning a lot on this job.
Yeah, I'm learning a ton.
Yeah.
And that's what really drove me to this when I started exploring all these different careers, that the ones, I told you about that you can do with a PhD. I sort of found that they all sounded interesting.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, none of these have anything in common. I don't know why they all sound so interesting or why I've enjoyed all these different experiences that seem to have nothing in common. And it kind of came back to what drove me to the PhD in the first place, which is I think I just like the learning. I like trying all these new things and experiencing them. Yeah.
That's so cool. I love
know.
that.
And I think you're probably just like a round person in the sense that like some people are very pointy and they like, I'm going to do this one thing and this is what I like to do. And it sounds to me like, Amanda, you could probably do pretty much anything.
Yeah, definitely.
No, in the sense that, your interests are wide, and I don't know.
Yeah. My interests, I think, are more in the type of work and the kind of having the impact, analyzing situations,
right,
coming up with answers. Yeah, it's a lot more. I think that's something I've learned as I've gotten older and gone through all of these experiences is you can have your work driven by a couple of different things. And sometimes it's the content, and sometimes it's kind of the day-to-day activity, and sometimes it's the impact, and sometimes it's the people or the lifestyle. And that's so different for every person.
Right. So
you
true.
Just got to find what makes you tick, and I like it. Yeah. So Amanda, it sounds like there's a lot of advantages to your job, but what would you say are some of the drawbacks, and what's a typical day like?
Yeah. So there is no typical day really, because it depends on the project and it depends on where you are in the project. But this is actually a little related to whether you view it as a drawback or a perk is kind of up to you. But consultants
depends on the person.
Travel. Exactly. So we travel to the client sites because we do work so closely with the clients. But for me at least, and this varies a bit firm to firm, but I have traveled for about half of the time that I've worked here. The other half I've had local clients. And so when I'm traveling, then I'm traveling to the client's office a couple of days a week, maybe 3 days a week. And so I think that can get a little bit tiring to do that kind of week after week. Especially if you're a
person that really just hates travel or...
Exactly. If you hate travel, this is probably not the job for you.
Right.
And some people love it because they collect all of their, loyalty points and
the
thrill of it.
Yeah, Mosaic, JetBlue.
Exactly. The biggest, I guess, drawback is really that the hours can be a little unpredictable. And I think coming from a PhD where I had a lot of control over my days, that was a challenge for me. But you're really at the request of the client. And so the hours can be long and it's not always super predictable.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad you pointed that out. So things to consider. But anyway, we should wrap this up and head on into the rapid fire.
We always love doing the rapid fire, and I don't even know like we keep saying, we're not changing the name because that's where we started, but we've never been rapid about the rapid fire.
Okay, so I don't have to
no, God, no. All right, but here we go. What is the scariest thing you've ever done?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I don't do that. I actually don't like really scary things. Probably these different career kind of shifts actually have been pretty scary. But
that is scary. Yeah. Well, trust me, I haven't hung off a cliff or jumped out of an airplane either. So
hiking is about as dangerous as I get, and I even don't like to do that alone or anything. So
safety first.
Meg and I just did a hike last week, and we get off the trail a little bit. Don't tell anyone. No. Yeah. And we were kind of lost for a while, but we ended up going over. We were just laughing. We probably shouldn't have been laughing because we probably should have been a little bit more scared. But we were like, "What are we doing?" We're like hanging off rocks and
some pretty steep rocks. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I think laughing was the only way to get through it. But go ahead.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Most valuable class you have taken, or one of the most valuable. It's always hard to choose.
I will probably point back to my high school chemistry class.
Wow.
I feel like the fundamental math that I learned in that class, I have continued to use throughout all of college, graduate school, and even in my current job.
Wow. It's great if you can get a good high school chemistry teacher. It can really be a game changer.
Yeah, It sounds like it, it kind of set your future, that one class right there.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Kudos to whoever your chemistry teacher was.
Yeah, he was great. Okay. He was a great teacher.
All right. Place you have been that you loved?
Probably Norway. It was.
I haven't been there, so
yeah, it's so beautiful. Yeah. And if you like hiking, There's just so much of it. It's one of those places where kind of no matter where you go, it's just breathtaking. So you can't go wrong.
Wow.
Put it on the list, Meg. We'll go in Norway.
we should. I think we should. That's great.
Yeah. I'm in for it. All right, plan. Okay. Teenage heartthrob. Like celebrity heartrob, not
No, not my like crush on
Timmy
the
chemistry class.
Maybe David Beckham.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one.
Bend it like Beckham.
I was more of a soccer player than a runner, at least in the beginning of high school. So
yeah, well, everybody can understand that. Bend Beckham for sure. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how cool are you?
Oh boy. I'm probably like a little too shy and a little too nerdy to be super cool. So probably like moderately cool.
I don't think that's true at all, but
maybe a 7.
Okay. Favorite day of the week?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's either Friday or Saturday for sure. Maybe Friday. There's something about just like Friday night, just kind of.
Yeah. You get the whole weekend ahead of you. That's what I said. You'd be surprised. Like you would think, you ask this question to people and they're going to say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, one of those days. Got some people just like, I always bring up Madeline Mann because she said Tuesdays, and we're like, Tuesdays? What the heck? And she said, well, Monday, I have to catch up on emails and this and that. And then on Tuesday, I just get a lot done. It's really productive. And so I'm like, well, that says a lot about you.
Right.
It's your work productive day. That's your favorite day of the week.
Yeah,
so
I like my job, but I like the weekends too.
She's a Uber go-getter for sure. Anyway, okay. How do you de-stress?
Running for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you still running a lot? I mean, I know you're very pregnant. Our listeners don't know that, but they do now.
I was texting Meg about this. I'm walking now, but I find that also very enjoyable, and I hope to return to running at some point, but for now,
do you have a baby jogger yet?
What?
Did you get a baby jogger for your bridal shower? I mean, baby shower. Yeah, there you go. You need one of those. Okay. If you could pick one superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, probably flying.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that counts as a superpower. I mean, I would say I'd want to be able to instantly be in another location, but that's not really a superpower if you think about it. I mean,
I was thinking about that too. But I think flying would give you kind of access to that, but also be fun.
Be flying.
Yeah, that's a win-win.
As long as it's safe.
Yeah.
That is a win-win.
Yeah.
It's got to be safe.
Right. Totally. I'm on board with that.
Okay. So morning person or night owl?
Morning person, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And you always have been? That's just
always have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
In college, I used to, and actually through grad school, I used to would have like my favorite cafe, and like once or twice a week at least, I would try to get there right when they opened at like 7 or 7:30, and that's when I always do my best work.
Yeah, it was probably nice and quiet in college at that hour.
Exactly.
Crickets. Yeah. Okay. Last one. If you are binge watching anything, what is it?
We actually just finished watching Schitt's Creek.
Oh, did you enjoy it?
I've seen that one. It's so good. Yeah. I highly recommend it.
I've gotten a little bit into it. I haven't finished it, but yeah, it is really funny.
Yeah, I have not seen it.
Interesting characters. Very interesting characters. Yeah.
I feel like work tends to be a little like busy and stressful, so I like TV that is very light. I have a hard time with TV that's also stressful and scary.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, Amanda, you did that like a pro. No problem.
Oh, that one. It was pretty rapid. That went by quickly.
Yeah. Not bad at all. Yeah. And thank you so much, Amanda, for coming on and sharing all of your wonderful and amazing knowledge about going into the field of science and biochemistry in particular, or biomedical engineering. Thanks so much. I know some listeners are going to find this really helpful and valuable.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm just happy to be here.
You were a great guest, Amanda, full of information, and I'm sure, as Meg said, someone's going to find this helpful, and you can just say, you're welcome. I was happy to do it.
Thanks.
Happy to help you out.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Same to you.
Oh my gosh, I so enjoyed our conversation with Amanda. It's so inspiring to have a young woman fully engaged in the science world, and she's so accomplished. I'm really proud of her, and what great tips and advice she shared.
Yeah, I mean, she's clearly an amazing student and person. I mean, to get the Fulbright Scholarship, we all know that's just a huge achievement, and very few people get that honor. So,
and not everybody gets into Yale either.
Yeah. Well, geez, if Yale doesn't let in a Fulbright Scholar, we don't know what's going on.
No, there you go. But anyway, Amanda, thank you so much for coming on, and you were an amazing guest. And
thank you so much.
This is a shout out to all you young scientists out there.
Yeah, for sure. We really appreciate you all listening today. And if you could do us a huge favor and subscribe to our podcast, that would really help us out.
Right, which is free, by the way. Some people don't know that. And it really helps us to get the word out about the podcast and help our podcast to grow. So we're working really hard on it, and we hope you can help us. But thank you so much to all that do, and thanks for tuning in and listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. So have a great week, everyone.
Yep, have a great week.
And this has been an Academic and Career Advising Services production.